men sharing,
Yes.
their experiences, their foibles, their missteps, their wants, their aches, and just and a lot of humor with it.
At 61, Brad Pitt still looks like a movie star, but he's finally starting to get real about his past. Even though he's moved on with his new girlfriend, Ines, there's one name that always seems to come up when he talks about the good old days. It turns out, among all the fame and the messy breakups, there is one specific woman he just can't seem to get out of his head. Are we thinking of the same woman? We'll find that out. The woman Brad could never forget. You guessed it right, it's Jennifer. In recent years, sources close to the actor have pointed to a pretty major admission. She was the one that got away. The Jen was the one he could never truly let go of emotionally. You have to go back to when they were the undisputed king and queen of the world to understand Jennifer Aniston's weight in Pitt's life, and why Jen is that exact woman Brad could never forget. In his early 60s, sure, Brad could never forget the tragic love story everyone rooted for, especially if you're a Friends fan. Their story didn't start with a scandalous movie set or a high-speed chase. It started with a classic, low-key Hollywood setup. It also did not start in the set of Friends, on the spot. In 1998, their agents, who were actually friends, decided to play matchmaker and booked them for a blind date. It sounds almost too normal for two people that famous, but Jen later described it as a really easy evening. For a guy like Brad, who was already dealing with the heavy machinery of fame, that easy feeling was everything. He had just come out of a high-intensity engagement with Gwyneth Paltrow, and Jen, the star of Friends, offered a kind of grounded California girl warmth that he hadn't found anywhere else. For the next 2 years, they were the dream. They made their red carpet debut at the 1999 Emmys, and honestly, the internet would have broken if it existed back then. They looked like two people who had just stepped off a beach in Malibu, all blonde hair, tan skin, and genuine smiles. Then came the wedding in July 2000. Which is still talked about as one of the most extravagant parties in history. They spent $1 million on a 5-acre estate in Malibu, filled the place with 50,000 flowers, and even had a gospel choir and fireworks that lit up the Pacific Ocean. It was meant to be the ultimate happily ever after, and for a while, it really was. They bought a massive $13.5 million Tudor-style mansion in Beverly Hills, and spent years renovating it together, tile by tile, creating what they thought was their forever nest. Brad even popped up on Friends as a guy who hated Rachel Green, a bit of meta humor that fans still obsess over in 2026. The courting phase was full of these little normal moments that Brad seems to crave now that he's in his 60s. They would go for drives, hide out in low-key diners, and Brad famously said in an interview with Rolling Stone that Jen was the most delicious thing he'd ever met. He praised her for her stillness and the way she could just be. But as the years went on, that stillness started to feel a bit too quiet for a man who was entering a restless phase of his career. By 2004, the world started hearing whispers from the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. While the tabloids were busy painting a picture of a secret affair, the truth was a bit more complicated and, in some ways, more painful. Courtney Cox, who is Jen's best friend, eventually let it slip that Brad was actually honest with Jen about what was happening. He didn't just sneak around. He told her he was feeling a massive connection with Angelina Jolie while they were still married. Imagine that conversation, sitting in your beautiful home while your husband tells you he's fighting an attraction to his co-star. The breakup in early 2005 was a global event. They tried to keep it classy, releasing a joint statement saying they remained committed and caring friends. But the pictures of Brad on a beach in Kenya with Angelina and her son Maddox just months later told a different story. Jen later admitted that she was shocked by how fast he moved on, and famously noted that he seemed to be missing a sensitivity chip. It was a brutal, public ending to a relationship that people thought was bulletproof. For years, Brad was painted as the villain who traded the girl next door for the vamp, and that reputation stuck to him for a long time. Fast forward to 2026, and the perspective has shifted dramatically. As Brad hit his 60s, he started doing the kind of deep reflection that only comes with age and sobriety. He famously apologized to Jen years ago for how he handled the split, and he's been spotted at her big birthday parties and holiday events ever since. While his time with Angelina was a whirlwind of passion and a massive family, Jen represented a time when life was easy, and he didn't feel like he had to be a global savior every day. Brad has allegedly told friends that losing Jen's friendship during those dark middle years was one of his biggest regrets. He's even gone as far as to say in private circles that he never truly got over her in terms of the comfort they shared. It wasn't about wanting to be married again, but about missing the person who knew him before the world got so incredibly loud. Today, they are buddies in a way that feels incredibly mature. They swap advice, they laugh about the old days, and there are even rumors in early 2026 that they've discussed a joint double date with their new partners to finally put the old ghosts to rest. At 62, Brad finally seems to realize that the woman he could never forget isn't a prize he lost, but a person who taught him what it means to actually be seen, and he's spent the last 20 years trying to find that feeling again. As that golden light faded, a more intense, darker fire was already beginning to roar, and its name was Angelina, the woman the public won't forget. For 5 years, Jennifer and Brad were that undisputed expensive couple of Hollywood.
I think Jennifer has conducted herself with enormous restraint in the last few months.
A duo that personified a specific kind of sun-kissed, beige linen perfection. They were safe, beloved, and seemingly untouchable, representing the ultimate girl-next-door fairy tale where the prom queen actually kept the quarterback. But as that golden light began to fade under the weight of routine and mismatched expectations, a more intense, darker fire was already beginning to roar on the horizon, and its name was Angelina. The spark ignited on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, a film that was supposed to be a high-concept action flick, but turned into the most expensive public display of chemistry in history. Angelina Jolie wasn't just another actress, she was the antithesis of the soft, relatable charm Jen provided. She was tattoos, knives, and a wild child reputation that had recently been weaponized into a fierce, humanitarian mystery. While Brad and Jen were still technically the face of marital bliss, the paparazzi lenses were catching something different in the desert heat of the film set. There was an undeniable magnetic friction between Brad and Angelina, a sense of two predators recognizing their equal. While they both initially denied any physical infidelity during filming, Brad later admitted to Aniston that he felt an immediate attraction to his co-star, an honest confession that served as the final nail in the coffin of their 5-year marriage. For Jennifer, the collapse of her marriage didn't happen in the sanctuary of a private home. It was a slow-motion car crash, televised globally in tabloid ink. The devastation was surgical. In January 2005, the couple announced their separation with a polite, sterile statement about remaining committed friends. But that narrative was decimated only months later. That we've mentioned infamous photos of Brad, Angelina, and her young son Maddox on a beach in Kenya felt like a public erasure of Jennifer's history with the man. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a replacement. The media cruelly framed the transition as a binary choice. The scorned woman who allegedly refused to have children versus the temptress who offered a ready-made family. In her first major interview after the split, Jen famously remarked that Brad was missing a sensitivity chip, a rare moment of raw vulnerability from a woman who had been gaslit by the very industry that once worshipped her marriage. Once the dust settled, Brangelina emerged as a monolithic cultural entity that redefined celebrity. They didn't just date, they built a sprawling international empire. The transition from the Pitt-Aniston era to the Pitt-Jolie era was a move from Hollywood royalty to global deities. They traded the Malibu beach house for French chateaus and African missions, turning their lives into a perpetual caravan of adopted and biological children: Maddox, Zahara, Shiloh, Pax, Knox, and Vivian. This wasn't the quiet, domestic life Brad had lived with Jen. This was a high-stakes performance of power and parenthood. They became the faces of a new kind of fame, one that blended red carpet glamour with heavy-hitting geopolitical influence through their work with the UN and various global humanitarian missions. Their career together became a symbiotic machine that sustained their public image for over a decade. Brad pivoted into highbrow producing with Plan B Entertainment, winning an Oscar for 12 Years a Slave, while Angelina used her clout to transition into directing ambitious projects like Unbroken. They eventually solidified their union in 2014 with a wedding at their French estate, Chateau Miraval. The ceremony was a masterclass in branding. The children were deeply involved, even drawing on the bride's custom Versace veil. They were no longer just stars. They were a sovereign nation of their own making, commanding public fascination and acceptance through their shared devotion to global causes and their growing brood. However, the heat that sustained them eventually became their undoing. They reunited on screen for the 2015 film By the Sea, a moody, experimental piece about a marriage falling apart in the south of France. In hindsight, the film felt like a haunting, prophetic bookend to the fire that had started on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. The dark fire that Angelina brought into Brad's life had burned hot and bright, but it was consuming the very foundation it was built upon. The cracks were hidden from the public until September 2016, when everything shattered on a private jet flight from France to Los Angeles. After a decade together, their divorce was messy and highly publicized. Suddenly, the triangle that defined a generation was back in the headlines. Old interviews were resurrected. Fans imagined Jen smirking somewhere with a glass of wine, but she never played into it. In fact, she remained classy and quiet. The era of Brangelina ended in a way that made the Aniston split look like a minor misunderstanding. Angelina filed for divorce just 2 days after the flight incident, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking sole physical custody of their 6 children. What followed was a decade-long war of the rosés, involving bitter disputes over their $500 million winery and allegations of physical and emotional abuse. The public acceptance they had built fractured under the weight of these accusations and the sheer length of the legal gridlock. While they were declared legally single in 2019, it took until December 2024 to reach a final settlement on their property and marital rights. Even as now's trial over the winery looms, the legacy of Brangelina remains a complex mix of cinematic triumph and personal tragedy. A reminder that the most intense fires are often the most difficult to extinguish. The immediate aftermath was messy, loud, and incredibly public. While the world picked sides, Brad went underground, trading red carpets for a sculpting studio and AA meetings. The great what if. If Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt had remained a united front, the landscape of 21st century celebrity culture would look fundamentally different. Their continued union would have likely solidified a Hollywood dynasty built on a rare blend of relatability and untouchable glamour. Rather than becoming the protagonists of a decade-long media narrative centered on betrayal and rival factions, they would have likely evolved into a powerhouse production duo, merging Plan B Entertainment's prestige with Aniston's unmatched comedic timing and television influence. Culturally, the Team Jen versus Team Angelina phenomenon, which essentially birthed the modern era of toxic celebrity fandom and clickbait journalism, might never have materialized. Without the high-profile divorce, the public's obsession with their personal lives might have matured into a more stable respect for their longevity. We might have seen them navigate the transition from young stars to elder statesmen of the industry together, perhaps even co-starring in a series of sophisticated dramas that capitalized on their undeniable chemistry. On a personal level, the trajectory of their philanthropic and creative lives would have shifted. While Pitt may have still pursued his passion for architecture and Aniston her business ventures, their shared brand would have been one of stability in an industry defined by volatility. Ultimately, their staying together would have preserved a specific old Hollywood dream, the idea that even under the harshest spotlight, a high-profile marriage can endure and thrive. But that didn't happen. And so we ask, what happened to Brad after Jolie? Meeting Ines. Pitt admitted to hitting rock bottom, famously telling GQ he'd replaced his heavy drinking with cranberry juice and fizzy water, claiming to have the cleanest urinary tract in LA. It was a period of intense, almost performative soul-searching. He spent hours in a friend's studio, molding clay as a way to feel emotion at his fingertips, a literal attempt to reshape a life that had been shattered into $6 million shards. For years, the legal battle hummed in the background like a low-frequency migraine. While they were declared legally single in 2019, the actual divorce settlement didn't cross the finish line until the very end of 2024. The drama wasn't just about custody, it was about the winery, Chateau Miraval. They fought over stakes, sales to Russian oligarchs, and secret NDAs, turning their French paradise into a legal battlefield. During this monastic era, Brad's relationship with his children became increasingly strained. Reports surfaced of some kids dropping the Pitt from their surnames, a blow that sources say hit him remarkably hard.
Seeing my wife have to be her strongest and knowing that it's the scariest of news.
He was a man with all the Oscars and money in the world, yet he was essentially a ghost in his own family home. As the dust began to settle, Hollywood's most eligible bachelor, now silver-haired and sporting a more relaxed vibe, dipped his toes back into the dating pool. It started with whispers. In 2017, there was Sienna Miller, but that was mostly just festival flirting at Glastonbury. Then came the intellectual era. In 2018, he was linked to Neri Oxman, a brilliant MIT professor and architect. It seemed like he was looking for something deeper, someone who didn't care about movie trailers. But the tabloids wouldn't let him be. Every time he sat next to a woman, the internet exploded. There was a brief, bizarre stint with German model Nicole Poturalski in 2020, who happened to be in an open marriage, but that fizzled out as quickly as a summer blockbuster. Then came the Emily Ratajkowski rumors in 2022. It was casual, it was fun, and it was exactly what a man recovering from a decade-long legal war needed. Something low stakes. Everything changed in late 2022 at a Bono concert. That's where he was first spotted with Ines de Ramon. At first, people thought she was just another name on the list, but Ines was different. A jewelry executive and the ex-wife of Vampire Diaries star Paul Wesley, she brought a no-drama energy that finally stuck. They didn't do the Brangelina thing. There were no matching tattoos or coordinated humanitarian missions for the cameras. Instead, they had low-key dinners in Paris and quiet New Year's trips to Mexico. By 2024, they were the real deal. They made their official red carpet debut at the Venice Film Festival, looking like the epitome of cool. The transition was complete now. It seems so. Brad Pitt isn't the chaotic rock-bottom guy from the 2017 interviews anymore. He and Ines are now fully living together in Los Angeles, carving out a life that feels remarkably grounded for a guy who once lived in a goldfish bowl. While he's still busy filming F1 movies and producing half of the films you see at the Oscars, his personal life has finally gone quiet. And in the world of Brad Pitt, quiet is the ultimate luxury. He's moved from the misery of the split into a committed partnership that proves there is, indeed, life after the end of the world. And though sometimes there's a lot of talk and narratives about him and Jen, their past, and their eternal feelings with each other, he seems to be happily living with his Ines now. What happened to Jen after Pitt? If time is a healer, For Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt, it has also been a master editor. 2 decades after their divorce, the tabloid explosion has finally settled, revealing a landscape that looks nothing like the Team Jen versus Team Angelina battlefield of the past. In 2025, with Aniston reflecting from the vantage point of her mid-50s, and Pitt having navigated a second public divorce and a journey toward sobriety, the story of their fallout has shifted from a tragedy of betrayal to a study in adult accountability. This is the era of the long game, a period where the exposure of Pitt's flaws was met not with Aniston's resentment, but with his own admission of guilt. When Pitt reached for Aniston's hand backstage in 2020, it wasn't just a photo op, it was a cultural surrender. For 15 years, the media had insisted on a narrative of permanent estrangement. That one moment exposed the truth. They had become buddies. Aniston has since confirmed this in recent interviews, including her 2025 reflections, where she describes the former drama as a leather shoe, something old, worn out, and largely irrelevant to her current life. However, the path to this friendship required a specific kind of reckoning from Pitt. Reports throughout the early 2020s detailed a series of private apologies he made to Aniston during his journey through sobriety. He reportedly took full ownership for being an absentee husband, admitting that he had been stoned and bored for much of the end of their marriage. This is perhaps the most profound exposure of the entire saga. It wasn't Aniston who exposed him in the end, it was Pitt himself, acknowledging that the golden boy persona of the early 2000s was a mask for a man who wasn't emotionally present. This admission effectively validated everything Aniston had hinted at in her sensitivity chip era. By taking responsibility, Pitt finally allowed the sad Jen narrative to die, replacing it with the reality of 2 humans who simply weren't equipped to handle the pressure of their own myth. In 2025, Aniston is using her platform to correct the most damaging part of the 20-year-old exposure, the selfish workaholic myth. In a landmark interview this year,
it was okay. It wasn't, I hit somebody. I immediately take the blame.
She spoke candidly about the PTSD of that era, particularly the relentless speculation that she chose her career over children. She finally pulled back the veil on her private struggles with IVF during the exact years her marriage was ending. "They didn't know my story," she told the media. By exposing her medical history now, she has retroactively dismantled the tabloid's primary weapon. The world now sees that while Pitt was finding himself with a co-star, Aniston was privately battling for a family she was being publicly accused of rejecting. Today, their lives have moved into entirely different spheres of domestic bliss. Pitt is in a committed, low-key relationship with Ines de Ramon, a pairing characterized by the very privacy he lacked in the 2000s. Meanwhile, Aniston has settled into a life of quiet power. She has become a vocal critic of the toxic media culture she once fronted, calling out the anonymous schmucks on social media who have replaced the paparazzi of the 2000s. She has replaced the need for a partner with a sanctuary of private life filled with deep female friendships and professional autonomy. The 20-year hindsight exposes a final unexpected truth. Jennifer Aniston didn't just survive the divorce, she won the narrative by outgrowing it. She no longer feels the need to correct the record because, as she noted in October, the news cycle is so fast, it just goes away. The exposure of Brad Pitt, his initial callousness, his subsequent apologies, and his eventual sobriety served as the catalyst for her to become unsinkable. She proved that closure isn't a conversation you have with an ex-husband. It's a house you build for yourself, far away from the cameras. Now at 61, no one can not just discredit Brad just because of his personal romantic life. Sometimes people forget how monumental his career was, especially at his peak. Without the romance. Yes, we're talking about a guy who started as an uncredited background actor, literally man at beach with drink, in 1987's Hunk, and ended up becoming a dual-threat Oscar winner, who basically redefined what it means to be a movie star in the 21st century. The first real milestone that changed everything, was 1991's Thelma and Louise. Pitt had about 7 minutes of screen time as the cowboy hitchhiker J.D., but those 7 minutes were a tectonic shift. He didn't just play a character, he became an overnight sensation and a certified sex symbol. Most actors would have coasted on that pretty boy energy forever, taking every rom-com script thrown their way. But Pitt's legacy is built on the fact that he immediately tried to dismantle that image. He went from the golden boy lead in A River Runs Through It, 1992, to playing a grimy, terrifying serial killer in California, 1993, and a stoned couch dweller in True Romance, 1993. This was the birth of his character actor trapped in a leading man's body vibe. By the mid-90s, he was hitting what fans call his prestige run. 1994 brought Interview with the Vampire and Legends of the Fall, which cemented his box office power. But it was 1995 that proved he had the acting chops to back it up. He teamed up with David Fincher for C7N, a movie so bleak it shouldn't have been a hit, yet it became a cultural touchstone. That same year, he did 12 Monkeys, playing a frantic, wild-eyed mental patient. That role bagged him his first Golden Globe and his first Oscar nomination, officially signaling to the industry that he wasn't just a face on a poster. Then came 1999 and Fight Club. If you're looking for the definitive Pitt milestone, this is it. Tyler Durden wasn't just a role. It was an era-defining performance that tapped into a specific kind of Gen X angst. Even though the movie was a bit of a slow burn commercially, its legacy is massive. It's the film that proved Pitt could be the face of counterculture while still being a massive A-lister. He followed this up by leaning into his weird side again in Guy Ritchie's Snatch, 2000, playing a barely intelligible pikey boxer because he wanted to subvert expectations again. The early 2000s marked a shift toward the mogul phase. In 2001, he co-founded Plan B Entertainment. This is arguably the most important part of his long-term legacy. While other actors were just looking for their next paycheck, Pitt was looking for stories that wouldn't get made otherwise. Plan B became a powerhouse, backing auteur-driven films like The Departed, The Tree of Life, and The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. This wasn't just a vanity project. Plan B has produced 3 Best Picture winners: The Departed, 2006, 12 Years a Slave, 2013, and Moonlight, 2016. When Pitt finally got his first Oscar, it wasn't for acting, it was as a producer for 12 Years a Slave. That says a lot about where his head was at. On the acting front, the 2000s and 2010s were about range and cool. You had the Ocean's 11 trilogy, where he played Rusty Ryan with a constant snack in hand, making effortless charisma look like an Olympic sport. But he also took massive swings with The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, 2008, and Moneyball, 2011, both of which earned him Best Actor Oscar nods. In Moneyball, he played Billy Bean, a role that defined his later career style. Understated, thoughtful, and deeply human. He also became a go-to guy for revisionist history. Whether he was scalping Nazis as Lieutenant Aldo Raine in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, 2009, or playing a weary tank commander in Fury, 2014, he mastered the art of the gritty, grizzled veteran. This eventually led to his ultimate acting milestone, 2019's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Playing the stuntman Cliff Booth, Pitt reached a level of cool that felt like a throwback to guys like Steve McQueen or Robert Redford. It was the perfect culmination of his career. Relaxed, funny, slightly dangerous, and totally magnetic. He finally swept the awards season, taking home the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Looking at his legacy now, it's about more than just a list of movies. It's about how he used his star power to protect real cinema. Through Plan B, he's championed diverse voices and challenging narratives, films like Selma, If Beale Street Could Talk, and Minari. He's also stayed surprisingly modern, jumping into action comedies like Bullet Train, 2022, and upcoming projects like F1, 2025, showing he's still got that box office draw even in his 60s. Pitt's career is a masterclass in evolution. He started as the guy everyone wanted to look like, then became the actor everyone wanted to work with.
Like, amazing thing this experience was for me. It was a men's group, it was AA, it was when I first was getting sober.
And finally became the producer the whole industry respects. He didn't just survive Hollywood, he figured out how to own it on his own terms. His milestones aren't just about the trophies on the shelf, but about the way he consistently chose the interesting path over the easy one. That's a legacy that'll stick around long after the credits roll. What's your side about all the Hollywood headlines on Brad's past marriage life? Do you think he would ever forget his first wife? Leave your comments below, and if you like this video, hit that subscribe button for more.